Hello and welcome to BCU Sport TV. We are bringing the Six Nation talk show here. 2 weeks gone and third week after the 1 week break. We'll find out how important is that week first up. But I'm joined once again with Mark and Phil. Gentlemen, the week break, how important is that in this championship?
I think it's massive. I think it just gives every team a real opportunity to kind of assess where they are. Get some good kind of minutes on the training field, but also just for some of those players that have had niggles, have had struggles to kind of get themselves back in a position to compete, and we've kind of already seen that with some of the changes of those guys coming into those squads. So I think it's really important, and really kind of builds a bit of anticipation as well. That's the other thing. There's real excitement going into this weekend.
I know, Mark, you're very excited. England versus Wales. I'm talking to two Welshmen here, by the way. Played 174 encounters between these two teams, and England have won 65 to Wales's 60. And also talking about that break, I just want to highlight a point that even the World Rugby is talking about player welfare, which is paramount. So, like you said, Phil, it gives much of time to players to recover.
Absolutely, and I think the player welfare issue is becoming more and more prevalent, and as it should be. Players have to be looked after, and I think the intensity of the Six Nations, that break is important. It's hard for us as fans because we want to see a game every week, but as Phil said, it builds up that anticipation. So really looking forward to this weekend now.
So the preparation, Eddie Jones had 5 days preparation with Manu Tuilagi in. There's so many changes. We didn't expect that, especially Rhys Zammit has been dropped and Josh Adams has been brought back. He's the one who scored the first try in last year's encounter where Wales won 40 points to 25, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, some interesting decisions there from Wayne Pivac. It's harsh, I think, on Rhys Zammit, but at the same time, you could say that Adams and Cuthbert are the two really on form. So it's good to see them with their chances again. It'll be interesting to see how England play those two, because Cuthbert probably hasn't had the happiest time always against England. So it'll be interesting to see how Eddie Jones uses that and plays towards Cuthbert's wing.
That's quite interesting. You mentioned that Josh Adams is the man in form, but in terms of his position, he didn't really play in that number 13 position. But do you think Wayne Pivac will switch him into the usual position of wing?
Yeah, I think from the team that's been announced, he's listed as the wing, and that probably shows you a little bit around how Wales want to play. I think the Cuthbert under the high ball, he's 6'5", 6'6". He's a very, very tall winger. Some interesting stats in the Telegraph this week from Charlie Morgan, just talking about of the last 3 or 4 years that England and Wales have played. Wales have kicked the ball 104 times, and I think only 3 of them have gone out deliberately. So they clearly have a plan. They want to keep the ball on the field. They want to make sure that England's line-out isn't an attacking option, and actually does the kind of the makeup of the back three just sell that a little bit more, that putting high balls up, if you've got Cuthbert's height and athleticism, and that's not to say Rhys Zammit isn't good at chasing high balls, but each player has their own different strengths, I think, and he's a really young guy who'll no doubt bounce back because he's clearly good enough. But I think it's also just understanding the tactical nuance of why you want certain people in certain positions.
That's some interesting stats you mentioned. We'll have a look at a few more stats. In terms of England's gaining meters, they have made 500 meters more comparing to Wales in the last 2 weeks. And also talking about the number of tackles made, Wales have done 150 tackles more comparing to England's.
Yeah, I think it builds on the game play that Wales developed, especially when they had Sean Edwards as coach, where they very much relied on their defence. And so they're not afraid to let the other team have the ball, and as a result, they have to make a greater number of tackles. But it'll be interesting to see how that changes, possibly with this game on Saturday. England have undoubtedly played the more attacking rugby so far, and we've been told that Pivac's game is more attacking. But we're still really waiting to see that come through. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on Saturday. It's a difficult place to go and play rugby, Twickenham. So it'll be fascinating.
I think the other point on the stats, and this is no disrespect to Italy, but the Italian game always skews those slightly, right? So it looks like England have gone a lot further, but actually Ireland went to Dublin and had a really difficult day. We talked about that in the review of that they didn't get on the front foot, so their meters in that game would have been pretty low, I would expect. So I think the Italy game probably skews that just quite a little bit. So I'm not sure we should read too much into it, but it maybe does say, just around the fortunes of the team so far in terms of how successful they've been.
Absolutely, indeed, that really do make sense in your statement, Phil. In terms of Toby Falcao, a legendary player, he's back after injury. How important his role is going to be?
It's going to be great to have him there, just because of his experience and his ability to play positively, even when Wales are sometimes struggling in the scrum, and he's been such an influential figure in terms of that in the past. So to have him back is really great. How fit he'll be, how up to speed he'll be, that's what we'll be waiting to find out. Because obviously straight back in, straight into a game like this, it's not easy for anybody. But from a personal point of view, it's great to see him back in.
Wonderful. You want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's fascinating. You see, Tuolangi parachuted back in. He's only played one game for Sale. Falatao's played 2 games for Bath. Watched him last weekend, and he was okay. Yes, he's a different player in a Welsh shirt, but I do wonder about the risks of just dropping guys in, because there is a huge expectation. But for both of those, they are world-class players on their day. But are they potentially being set up to fail a little bit? As Mark said, catching up on the systems and the processes that have been in place for the last 4 or 5 weeks through the training camps. If they've not been exposed to that's a really difficult task. So I would just I think we just need to be a little bit careful around how much the expectation we have on these players and the pressure that kind of presents.
Wonderful indeed. So we talk about Wales. We know that how Wales love to win at Twickenham, especially given the Six Nation fixtures. Let's talk about the England. Courtney Laws have been appointed as the captain. What will this go for, especially Tom Curry's mindset? Is that a good thing, or is he meant to be the captain for the Six Nations?
Funnily enough, me and Phil had this conversation earlier, and I think that it's interesting. Evidently, Courtney Laws did a good job as captain in the autumn series, and whether it's an ability to let Tom Curry play without that sort of pressure of being captain, but also, that every team has a number of leaders on the field. So Tom Curry will have a leadership role anyway. The fact that he's not named as captain might not make a massive difference, I don't think.
We mentioned about England making those meters. You mentioned about Italy having an impact. The Italy game, especially England had chance. How impactful is that when you play that running game, and with all due respect, the legendary Ben Youngs, who will make the highest England cap, making that after dominating that line-out drive for 15 meters and putting that box kick, is it like it happens, it just happens, or is it part of the game plan, or is it just Ben Youngs?
That's a good question. We probably need to ask him to know exactly what the thought process was. There may have been a call from somebody else outside of him. Like, he executes the decisions others will make for him. So I don't think we can kind of hang him out to dry on that. And it's something that people pick up. And I think it's just one of those things. Like a Six Nations 18 months before a World Cup is also the prime chance for these teams to put in some specific preparation. And you think back just before the last World Cup, or the Six Nations in the build up to that, England looked really fatigued, and that was because they were overtraining in the week to play matches under fatigue, because that's what happens in a World Cup cycle or in the World Cup tournament. By the time you get to week 5, 6, 7, there's a lot of fatigue there. So I don't think it's as clean cut as just saying the teams go out and they're as best prepared as they possibly can be. Like, there will be lots of stuff that we don't see going on in the background. There'll be a lot of planning, because they really don't get that many games together. You know what I mean? It's you're into, there's probably now 10 games left before a World Cup, so you have to use every single one. So there may be some strategy that we're not aware of, and I think it's worth kind of remembering that as we look at some of these selections and some of the decisions on the field. It's not as clean cut as you just got to go out there and win the game in front of you. There are bigger things at play.
Absolutely, indeed. I'm sure Ben Youngs will appear in his highest number of caps for England. Such a servant he has been, without a doubt. His experience will play a crucial game. I thought for a second that he might start as well, because Eddie Jones' plan was to start him quite often. Are you surprised with Joe Marchant exclusion?
Yeah, we talked in week one that we would like to have seen Joe Marchant at 13, and at some point I'd still like to see him there. As Phil said, I think the selections, there's a bigger picture here as to, it's not just about this Saturday, it is about developing the whole squad ready towards the World Cup. So, whereas it's very easy to look at one single game and say, well, why didn't that player play in that particular game? But Eddie Jones's job is preparing the team for the World Cup. So, and Marchant will definitely play a role in that.
I do think he's probably a little bit unlucky. I don't think he had his best game against Italy, and that's tough. Like, there's other far more established players around him. If you're looking at a toss-up between him and Manu, there is no real competition. And I think Daly gives you that cover of the whole of the back three and both centre positions. Yeah. So the versatility of Daly is pretty massive on the bench. So yeah, he is probably hard done by, but that's also the nature of the beast in terms of, you've got to perform in an England shirt or in your international shirt to be able to stay in that team. And I think you just kind of roll with the punches. And no doubt, as Mark said, he'll come back in and he'll do a good job. He'll be an excellent player for England moving forward. But yeah, it's probably the price you pay. And there's always going to be somebody that, as we just said with Reece Samet, he's not played badly, but there's just other reasons why you pick other people. So it's kind of just their time to take it on the chin and kind of just focus on the next opportunity.
Absolutely. It seems like everything depends on the match-by-match situation. So anything can go this way and that way. Talking about Manu Tuilagi's inclusion, we see loads of comments on social media. He will last only for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Either he will pull up his hamstring or so. I'm sure if that happens, Welsh fan will be delighted.
Absolutely. If he lasts 5 minutes, I'll be a very happy person. But he's such an influential player. And it's not just about what he does, but what happens around him. So England will be really pleased to have him back in there. But yeah, it's something that Wales are going to really have to look out for.
Finally, gentlemen, I think England by 5.
Yeah, I was going England by 4, so we're on the same page.
I think, as much as I hate to say it, I think England by a little bit more. I'm going to go England by 10.
Wow, there you go.
Are they going to let you back home?
Probably not.
No,
probably
okay.
Not.
Well, we'll wait and see. Sometimes it could go wrong. Yeah, just the prediction. And we'll have a break and we'll be back with Scotland versus France. Hello and welcome back once again. So it's time to talk about the Scotland versus France game. After disappointing loss against Wales, how do you think Scotland will fancy these chances?
Well, they will be hurting after the game against Wales, so I think they'll be throwing everything into this game against France. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Finn Russell wasn't on form against Wales. Scotland were going to need a big game out of him against France. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting encounter, I think.
Every time you think Scotland have maybe turned that corner and maybe found some consistency and exactly the same as Mark said with Finn Russell, he keeps being labelled a maverick and it's probably unfair, but then he has an incredible game against England and by his standards a really quite poor game against Wales. So do Scotland's fortunes live and die with him? I'd hope not, but it does seem to be that they are slightly more tied together than people would hope. So they need to bounce back and they need to refine that form.
Absolutely, indeed. He just turned, according to most of the critics, that hero to zero in that second game. But it happens in terms of international fixtures that it's very hard to keep that consistent and the momentum. But obviously, it's going to be a huge challenge when he faces in front of Ntamak, where they both play in the French league.
Yeah, and you know, they are both class players, and I think with Finn Russell, he probably plays a little bit more on the edge than Ntamak does, and you know, Finn Russell will always try things that maybe other out halves won't try, and there's always a risk that they will go well or they will go badly, and you know, some of the best sort of plays that he's ever made have been successful just by a whisker. Some of the long passes that he's made that have put people into space, you know, a little whisker and they could be intercepted. So, you know, he plays the game on the edge, and as a result, things can go wrong. But that makes him the player he is. That makes him the exciting player that he is. But yeah, as Phil said, it's interesting to see how closely Scotland's sort of ability to win are so closely related to Finn Russell's ability to play.
I also think it'd be fascinating, the battle of the defences. So Steve Tandy's done a great job with Scotland's defence. Shaun Edwards we know about, and he's clearly done an excellent job with the French. And in my head, I'm kind of going, in theory, this probably should be one of the most open games of the competition so far. Both teams love attacking, they love being on the front foot, but actually it's like American football in the Super Bowl when you get the best two attacking teams. Well, actually, the game is very often won and lost then by the defensive teams. So what does that look like on Saturday? I think will be fascinating to find out which defence can get on top, who can really apply that pressure and shut the other team down, and that will go a long way for me for deciding actually who comes out on top.
Marco, we talk about Shaun Edwards' heroic performance in terms of his coaching, where French defence is, and how much credit we should give to Fabien Galtier, the man with the goggles, since he took over Philippe Saint-André, but it's looked like they're completely different French team.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we have to give him that sort of those accolades because actually he has helped turn that French team around from being a very inconsistent team to actually being probably, you know, in the top 2 or 3 teams in the world, and you know, there's no doubt that he's played a big part in terms of that. I think Shaun Edwards, alongside him, has been very influential as well. But you know, put the two together, and you know, that's what has really helped turn the French game around, I think.
Looking at these stats, there's not much differences in terms of both the teams have compared in the last 2 weeks. How will Scotland, if the Scotland needs to win, do you think what should they do in terms of their tactical plans?
That's a very good question. I think maybe just kick a little bit more. You know, back yourself on defence, play territory, put France under pressure. At some point, you know, France are going to feel that squeeze. It's at Murrayfield. Use the crowd as Scotland do. They do, again. It's maybe a lazy cliche, but they are a slightly different team at home compared to on the road. So yeah, I think it's just about trying to really apply more pressure than the French team have played under so far. A couple of teams have come close, but just not consistently for long enough. But I would be backing Scotland's defence to make a real statement and try and get somewhere close to the amount of pressure it's going to need to put France off their game.
There will be a tight battle among the tight 5, especially when you compare both teams. France certainly have the advantage in terms of a bit of physicality coming into that. Do you think how will Scotland have to cope those physical dominance, especially in the tight 5?
Yeah, I don't think Scotland will be too worried about it. I think we've talked about their consistency in the last few weeks, and actually I think they're quite happy to meet any team's physicality. When you look at the teams that have been there, you know, even South Africa, they've really met them with, you know, fire with fire up front. So I don't think they'll be too worried about that. The French will obviously really go at them, but I think, as Phil said, the job that Steve Tandy has done in terms of really firming up that defence will stand them in good stead, and I think they really have got to use that home advantage, use the crowd to unsettle the French. We haven't seen the French unsettled that often, and I think that's what Scotland have really got to look to do is really sort of get them questioning each other and get them sort of unsettled so that they can get that little territorial dominance and then that physical dominance through the strong defence, and then it'll be interesting to see which way it goes.
Phil, after playing 2 home games, France coming after the break for an away game, what sort of mental aspect a team will come with, especially when you counter Scotland in Murrayfield?
Yeah, and that's, you'd say they're professional players, it shouldn't make a difference. I think we see time and time again it does. Right, like the France at home, you know, when they used to be inconsistent, the crowd would get on their own back. It would have an effect. So, and we just said that, you know, Wales in the Millennium, it's a really difficult place to go and play, as Scotland found out. Scotland at Murrayfield, as England found out, they're tough places. So I do think the crowd makes a difference. I think there was a lot of research done around, predominantly more football based, but actually around the difference that a crowd makes to a referee's decisions during COVID when no games were being played. And there's a pretty sizable impact, you know, like 10, 15, 20% of decisions go in the home team's favour because of the nature of the environment. So I don't think we can overlook that. And presuming that does apply to rugby, I think it's going to be exactly the same, if not maybe even more so. So yeah, I think it's something that they will need to have prepared for. And if they haven't, it could be a huge issue for them.
Phil mentioned about the Scotland have to dominate their position and territory. And where do you think, in terms of Scotland, Scotland's win and loss will be decided on?
I think it's going to be that defensive element that is going to be really important. I think it's going to be, you know, missed tackles. It's going to be that element of making sure that they are sort of in the game for the full 80 minutes and really battling with that physicality. It's going to be minor little things that will make the difference between winning and losing.
I think it's France's Six Nations, and probably France with win at least by 14.
14, interesting. I'm going to say France by 6.
I'm actually going to be controversial. I'm going to go for Scotland win by 2 or 3.
Is that because they beat Wales?
No, Wales beat them.
Oh, in fact, my bad. Well, there you go. Sorry, I got it wrong. But anyway, that's the Six Nations predictions for the week 3 of our Guinness Six Nations. And we'll see you on the week 4 with more action and more news.